Internet, I'm Stephanie back with another video. Today is going to be a fun one. I'm going to be trying to draw on my whiteboard to illustrate some of the ideas that I have today. And I'm going to be building on a topic that I had briefly talked about in an earlier video about comparing the hero's journey, which is typical for storytelling, for a lot of the stories that we're used to hearing, whether we understand this template or not, and comparing it to the fool's journey, which is sort of the template of storytelling used in tarot, and how those two stories take a different approach or put a different significance on what it really means to be the main character of that story. And earlier we had talked about whatever our perception is of what it means to be the main character will affect how willing we are or excited we are about participating in our own life as the main character. Today I want to take that a little bit of a step further and illustrate how the words that we use, the way that we talk to ourselves, right, the way that we understand storytelling and how thinking works and all of this other type of stuff, the words themselves, what role they play in how our thought patterns are formed, and really getting to the root cause of the duality mindset that keeps people really stuck. And I'm going to jump right in, and I'm going to do a word association to start it off. So if I were to say the word critical, what comes to mind for you first? Maybe it's critic, like a movie critic. Maybe it's criticism. Maybe if you watch Grey's Anatomy, it's, a life and death situation. It's a critical situation. Maybe it's of critical importance, right? It's a very heavy weight behind this word. Hypercritical is another one. Maybe you think of a person when you hear this word, someone who often comes across as being very critical of you or your choices, right? And these words have a sort of negative or a closed, I'm feeling a closing, a tightening, a defensiveness for these words, right? We don't like feeling like the stakes are life and death high. We don't like feeling something that is critically important implies a need for perfectionism, right? And these concepts themselves, just from saying the word critical, can lead to a tensing in the body that is that mimics the feelings of around anxiety, right? And so what if I were to, instead of just saying critical, what if I were to say critical thinking? Does this change the way that you understand the meaning of the word critical? And it should. And this is kind of the foundation of what I want to talk about today. Hopefully we can all follow along. It does feel a little bit, even to me, like there's red strings kind of tied up on the walls in my brain, but it's so important to understand this, and I hope that will be clear by the end of the video. So the fact that critical thinking is a term that explains kind of what thinking is or what it should be in and of itself, right? When you're watching a child develop, for example, or when you're in any type of education, you hear this word of trying to encourage critical thinking. And in that context, what does it mean? If our associations with the word critical are negative, like criticism and being judgmental, or having really high pressure stakes, or implying a need for a high standard of perfectionism, then the idea of critical thinking itself has a very different meaning than I believe it was intended to have. So let's look at it this way. Here we go with my writing. So I laughed to myself when I said, let's get to the root cause of duality, because this actually is going to be a little bit of an English lesson. This is about the root word for critical, and how having the wrong root word in your understanding changes how you feel about even thinking, how to think and learning to think, and the way in which you think, all are stemming from your understanding of the meaning of that word. So when we say critical, we assume that the root of that word is going to be critic. right? So again, because that has a negative association, this, as I'll get a little bit more into in a moment, can lead us to have a critical mindset, a judgmental mindset, a very perfectionist mindset, right? Versus what I believe the true root of this word is meant to be critique. I hope I spelled it right. It's hard to spell and think and talk at the same time. And this is from French, and we understand if I were to say critique instead of critic, you could probably infer that this has a different connotation, right? It's about analyzing. It's about giving feedback, maybe more like constructive criticism, you could say, or weighing things a little bit more objectively, right? You're looking for technical skill maybe as opposed to perfectionism, and you're studying the differences and you're making comparisons and analysis in your own mind, right? And when you look at it this way, and now the only reason that that the word critique has been lost from the word critical, it comes down to spelling, right? Because this word here would be critiqueal, right? That doesn't lend itself well to pronunciation, right? And if you start to erase some of these, extra vowels, the Q itself doesn't work in English as a standalone letter. So this is what has led to the compression of the word, using the letter C instead for the sound. And there we have critical, right? So why is this so critical to understand is the next question. What difference does it make how I understand the meaning of the word? How can that really affect my actual thought process, right? So we got some more papers here. So when you think of a critical mindset, I'm going to start saying critical or critiqual, just so you can understand that I'm trying to contrast the meanings of these two words. Now, actually, a good example here too is when you're typing on your phone. Think about it this way. How many times do you have to backspace the word before your phone realizes you did not mean to say duck, right? And it's about learning the dialects, learning your own vernacular, your own way of speaking, and the phone can pick up on these things, and that's where predictive text comes from, right? But our minds work the same way. So if when I see or say the word critic or critical, I always think such and such is always criticizing me, and the more I send, you could say, even thought energy into that definition, that is going to cause that definition to pop into my most frequently viewed, right? So if I don't often hear or see the word critique, but I'm always surrounded by people who feel critical to me, then when I think about critical thinking, maybe I subconsciously assume that what this means is judgmental thinking, right? And so this is what causes a split in a sense, because when you are being judgmental, you can only be judgmental of either yourself, it's inward, or it's outward, so it's everything else besides yourself, right? And so let's try to illustrate this here. And so this also in literature, this is what creates the idea of the other, right? So it's me and it's them, it's us and it's them, that type of mentality. This causes a split, because when you are critical, not critical, but critical in your thinking, you either need to criticize someone, because your thoughts are forming this pattern of being judgmental, right? That everything is very high stakes, right? These definitions determine how we view the world through our thoughts, and it either needs to be turned inward or it needs to be turned outward. Now, this in itself has created the me and the them, because as I'll show you again later, when you approach the world from critical, there doesn't need to be them at all. You can always be looking at your life through the lens of your own self. So I'll come back to that. But another way that I can show this here is it sort of creates this this spectrum or this division where your mind essentially forms two main streams of thought, which is I am better than them, or conversely, they are better than me. Right? So when I'm critical of myself, I think I actually got this backwards. When I'm critical of myself, I am putting them kind of in the power seat, or them as being the standard of what I feel like I should do. I'm falling short of where I see them, therefore they are better than me, right? And you can see here that it is giving away your power and your confidence and so on to them. Whereas if you are seeing the world critical of them, and you're always trying to bring that power back, oh, I'm so much better than them, right? This is where you end up with, difficulty in relationships and arrogance, or a hero complex, or, being the main character in a way where you think you're the center of the whole universe rather than just taking ownership of your role as the lead in your own story. So the problem here, not just the fact that you are now either criticizing yourself or you're becoming critical of other people, but the problem is these two things cannot both be true, right? So I cannot both be better than them and they be better than me, right? One of these two feels like it has to be right, and one of these two feels like it has to be wrong. And it's actually really great that I've drawn it this way backwards with the arrows bouncing around, because this is going to cause yourself, your consciousness or your subconsciousness, to constantly, it's like Pong, right? That back and forth from one end of the other to the spectrum of trying to reconcile within your brain which of these is actually true, right? And what I mean by that is, if you were to think of it in terms of coding, now I'm not a coder by any means. I used to have a Nexopia page, so I know a little bit about backslash and brackets and stuff 20 years ago, let's say, right? But the essential thing that I do understand is your computer functions in a way where you have to give it a clear command in order for it to give you a clear result, right? And our brains work this same way. And if our brain energy is receiving two different commands, right? Either I am always better, I have this high inflated view of myself, but also I believe they are better, then I have this low view of myself, and it becomes a coding error, right? Your brain doesn't know what to believe about yourself. And especially, again, which is helpful and ironic, is that this comes down to the root word. It also comes down to the root chakra, which is the state of stability and understanding in who you believe your own self to be, right? Hopefully that's clear. So when I'm conflicted about what I believe myself to be, this makes for the foundation of my whole psyche a very rocky sandcastle type of place to be, right? And it can be confusing. It causes highs and lows of feeling amazing about yourself and feeling terrible about yourself. Feeling great about other people and feeling terrible about other people. And it just causes this this internal confusion in your mind. And again, that's all on top of the fact that you are maybe just being an unpleasant kind of critical, perfectionist, hypercritical type of person by the nature of the thoughts that you're having. Because again, when you are in the mindset of believing yourself to be not as good as everyone around you, you're probably being really mean to yourself, right? You're probably not giving yourself credit for your hard work. You're probably feeling like, nothing you have is good enough. You have lack mentality. You've got the fear of failure coming out again. you're feeling unworthy. You know, if they're so much better than me, then why do they even want to be with me? Do they even love me? Whatever. And when you're bouncing on this end of the spectrum, thinking that you're better than everyone else, you are unable to connect with people. You can't make friends. You always see them as beneath you. Maybe relationships sour and you haven't fully realized why. But this is the split personality that comes from something as simple as misunderstanding what the word means that's trying to teach you about what thinking is. I hope all of that has made some sense. So let me just, and this, while I'm resetting my wonderful whiteboard here, to relate this back to, this would lend itself to the hero's journey versus the fool's journey, because the hero is the one who feels, again, on either side of the spectrum, I'm the most special. Maybe this is a good thing. Maybe I feel very confident in it at times, or maybe I feel terrible about that at times. So like, why should I be so important that all of this rests on me? And both of those feelings, positive and negative, can exist in the thought stream of believing yourself to be better. Now, if you believe yourself to be worse than other people, the two options exist as well. Maybe I feel great about that. Maybe I feel glad that I'm not, you know, so special because I just want to be normal and fit in, right? Or maybe I feel terrible about the fact that everyone else seems better than me. And even if I were to be the hero of that story, I'm thinking about Hamlet. Like, there's a whole moody, sullen kind of period where he just feels, stuck, and he can't move forward in his journey because he's busy basically feeling sorry for himself, everyone else, whatever. And so these mindsets, the victim mentality, not being able to complete your hero's quest because you feel less heroic than you feel like you should be, right? All of these types of things, again, come back to negatively affecting how we perceive being the main character and how willing we are to accept that we are the main character in our story. And not being willing to accept that you're the main character means you don't participate, you don't play your role to its fullest, and you end up living a life where by the end of it you maybe have a lot of regret because you didn't take those opportunities. And really, I couldn't believe it when I was drawing this whole thing out. It really comes down to understanding what thinking means and thinking about thinking in a different way. So now let's see what happens if instead of critic, I put critique. Okay, and I'm trying to refer to my notes because, again, like I said, this one, I know it's going somewhere good, but it seems a little dodgy to get there at times. So when you think of the word critique, again, you're thinking more about a learning journey, right? Feedback, well-reasoned feedback, right? I'm thinking like an art gallery, like you stand there and you're musing and you're reflecting and you're pondering, right? And so whatever thought process you're having is already a deeper thought process than when you're being critical, which might just be, snap comments, especially if it's coming from a subconscious mindset. You might be critical and you wish you weren't, and you hear yourself say something and it just jumped out so quickly, like, again, typing, and autocorrect fills it in for you basically because it started to predict this as a mindset for you. So switching to critiquing allows you more time to slow your thoughts down and to really analyze what you're thinking and how you're thinking and how you're feeling and how you're speaking to other people and so on. And it doesn't create that same separation of the self, because even if you were to say, okay, it's true to say that in the universe, everything falls into one of the two categories of either me or other, right? That still is true. But that acknowledgement of other things existing in the universe is not the same as causing a split in your mindset, because when you are being critical, right, the two different thought forms, if you're thinking about yourself as the center, which I like to do in the power seat, right, you're thinking about it from a perspective of pondering and analyzing and learning, then the question you're going to be asking yourself in your subconscious is not going to be, am I better than them? It's going to be, what can I learn from this, right? So whatever happens in your life, you're pausing to stand in front of that as a painting in a gallery and look at it and study it and see what emotions come up for me. What am I thinking of? What thought association patterns are coming to me, right? And what's the significance of me even standing here in this moment? What can I learn here in this moment? Now, if you were also going to say, what happens if I'm thinking about the other person or the them first, then all that happens in this case is the way that you phrase the question is reversed. So I'll show you what I mean here. So instead of saying, what can I learn from this? You can say, what is this trying to teach me? Right? Now you've switched it around and you've thought of the other first. What is this versus me, right? This comes first, where here says it's I before this, right? Hope that makes sense. So even if you're thinking about the other before yourself, you're still looking to them as a teacher, or that situation or whatever it is to be teaching you something, as opposed to it being a true or false type question of, if this is true, this cannot be true. If I'm the best, then they cannot be the best. If they're better than me, then I must be terrible, right? It's not causing you to have an existential question about the nature of your own being, right? It's only causing you to look at, from my eyes out, what can I see? What can I hear? What can I learn? How can I, if you're doing my own eyes in, what can I learn about myself? What is this showing me about myself, right? And yeah, from the external, someone else says something or something happens in your environment that's outside of your direct, input, let's say, into the environment. You could say, why did this happen in front of me? What's the significance here? If everything is happening for some type of reason, you could even add on to that, but you don't need to, right? But if there's a plan here, or if this is a story and everything that happens in your life then becomes almost like a plot element in your story, what's the purpose of this? Why did the author, whoever that is, why did the author include this in the story, right? And, the shift in thinking about thinking from being a process of judgment to being a process of learning and reflection, if we could change the way we think of critical thinking, I feel as though it would resolve a lot of these core, like I said, existential questions that we may not even realize we have. But I think once I've drawn it out this way, it becomes kind of obvious to see that, of course, if you're constantly bouncing back between two things that are a paradox, right? Of course, you're going to feel powerless and stuck in that. So I really hope that made sense. I think I'm going to leave that here for today. So the next time you're thinking about thinking, right, try to reroute the most used definition for critical, right? Try to approach your thinking in a different way. Try to approach learning in a different way as well. And start slowing down your thought process if you can, and maybe using these as questions if you need. I talked about earlier using a planned counter thought, right? Every time you catch yourself being critical, maybe these can be example sentences you can use to become instead more critical, right? What can I learn from this? Or what is this trying to teach me? Try those out. Try those questions out as a way of reframing your thought process and see what happens. I've done this, and of course I wouldn't be talking about it if I didn't stand by it. So I'm really hoping that can be helpful for some people who can understand maybe how this feeling or this split emerges. Even to understand, in a lot of cases, like we talked about with other people's projections of us, right? If other people are viewing the world through a critical lens versus through a critical lens, then it becomes easier to not take their behaviors personally, because you can really recognize that it comes from their own way of thinking as opposed to anything that you were going to do, because you know that those people stuck in that mindset either have to criticize themselves or they have to criticize someone else. So you might have just been the person that walked by on a day that they were being kinder to themselves, let's say, right? And being able to recognize that other people's projections, that you can't affect or change them necessarily if what they're doing is operating from this incorrect root understanding of the way that thinking is meant to function. I hope that makes sense. Thanks for watching, and have a wonderful day.